emerged, I think, at the Rome meeting, and Brian, I think it was partly Tim's idea. Brian has been working on this as a consultant for SEBI. Are we okay, Vanessa? Yeah, okay. Far ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the pilot study. As you've seen, I've called it Great and Progressively Diversified Expectations, with apologies to Charles Dickens. You will know Ethiopia. They're sitting in the Horn of Africa. This was taken almost 50 years ago, a year or so. I'm the one on the left with shorts, or one of the ones with shorts. So I've had a long-standing knowledge of Ethiopia. This is part of a series of Bill and Melinda Gates and SEBI contributions to livestock data enhancement in the country. On the left-hand side, you've got the master plan, which has been developed with support from Gates and ILRI. On the right, the GTP2, the second global growth and transformation plan that Ethiopia government has developed. The start of the process, or I mean, I don't know what the start of the process was, but the process preceding my engagement was a consultancy of this organization called Precise, which looked at a whole variety of different issues relating to livestock data in Ethiopia. It looked to the institutions involved, the types of data collected, and also that figure on the right just illustrates the hierarchy and who reports to whom, which is, I might say, extremely complicated. Also, as part of this, SEBI invited me to look at this program called Connecting Livestock Productivity Modeling Activities within country stakeholders' needs to support the decision making in the dairy sector. So that is the context. Dairy, a slide on the summary issues relating to dairy. It's 12 million livestock producing households, 40% of agricultural GDP, 12 to 80% of national GDP, so important. Milk production, very, very low in terms of 4 billion. I'll say a little bit more about that. One average production of 1.5 liters per cow per day. Local breeds, about 200 to 600 liters annually. Crossbreds a little bit more, but there are so few of them. Per capita consumption, extremely low. I'll say a bit more about that. More than 82% is consumed locally at farm level, and there is a great variability in terms of the demand. Putting this in context, you see on the left-hand side compared with various different countries, both internationally, and Ethiopia pretty well at the bottom in terms of milk consumption, and on the right hand those figures in terms of, I don't know where the pointer is. Oh, there it is. No, it doesn't connect. Showing that Ethiopia, even within that East Africa region, extremely low consumption. There are all sorts of things behind that. I just highlight this, that when you have in a country where a considerable proportion of the population are vegans for almost half of the year, does pose a little bit of a challenge in terms of promoting. So it's because of the large proportion of Orthodox Christians, and underneath from the Addis fortune, dairy distress, fasting periods slows dairy production. So it is a challenge in the country. There are various data sheds. This map on the left, and many people, by the way, have been looking at the dairy sector and what might be done from external groups, including USAID, including the Dutch in various different forms, among many others. So there are various different dairy sheds, and on the right-hand side, just showing this different in terms of milk use by the geographic region. So substantial difference. This is a SWOT analysis that has been done by one organization on the dairy sector. And if you just look at the title, it says tremendous resources in cattle, but a lot needs to be done in terms of production and on the consumption side. And so there are the strengths of the large cattle numbers, the opportunities, this incredibly fast-growing population, now 115 million more or less, and increasing urbanization, and on the left, very low production, and these and all the risks, which of course include the importations. And so a new agreement with New Zealand, for example, which is partly importation. I was asked to show the sort of value chains. Now, lots of people have done various value chains of the dairy sector. So I'm going to flick through a few. Various different groups have shown them. So with different ideas and different importance. This is the informal dairy sector, showing the sort of the enablers at the bottom, the government and various people, the various suppliers of services, and these various business opportunities. Of course, the large predominance of which is small-scale people. One or two organizations such as this, which has looked at where the opportunities are for different development organizations to come in and support this value chain in different places. A summary of the major constraints. So lack of a dairy-specific development policy. There isn't. So there's this broader livestock master plan, within which there are some extremely ambitious targets for changing dairy production, particularly looking at genetic improvement. Limitation in access to suitable land for dairy and feed production, a huge issue which came out of our final workshop. Feed and water. The cost of feed is very expensive. Feed is very scarce. Carl and I did a study a few years ago on the major health constraints to export of animals, and it wasn't meeting the quality needed to go into the Middle Eastern market. It was the feeding them to get them up to that quality. Shortage of supply of animals and genetic stock. Poor breeding and AI service, weak animal health services, the processing technology and know-how extremely limited, so poor and disorganized marketing systems, absence of strong dairy associations and board, and shortage of properly trained manpower. If you're looking at data needs, you saw a long list of general concepts there. The overview of the process. The first thing I had 3 visits myself and engaged various people. Interestingly, I was asked by SEBI to include 2 people who are in this room, Andrew Ash and Jonathan Rushton. Andrew went on an extended holiday, and Jonathan is going to talk to you next about his favorite thing, which is data. So it's been very difficult. I decided to engage a set of Ethiopian economists, partly for the reasons I've just described, but also getting national ownership. So Ethiopian scientists engaged, stakeholder groupings of representatives, a representation of that was identified. And these are the major groupings that we looked at: policy and regulatory people, the inputs and output services, that's everything from feed, genetics, health, and the extension services, the milk and milk products producers. Difficulty because there is no major organization representing the smaller scale producers, and so those that were represented were necessarily the larger ones and not necessarily representative. The processors and marketers, there's been a well-established milk processing organization in Ethiopia, and then of course research and extension. So then we, as I said, on the 3rd visit, we engaged. We had a workshop with a large representation of these different groups. And in this process, and in the earlier stages, these were the various headings under which we looked for. What are the fundamental data needs? What is going to be the use and application of those? what are issues relating to collection, quality control, and management, and then lastly, the institutional arrangements regarding the data management, the handling, analysis, feedback, IP, and access to that data. So these are things that all of those different groups I just mentioned were asked to talk about. And I'm just going to run through these quickly just to give you an idea of some of the selected issues within each of those. This is the policy and regulatory, which is things like meeting national demand, ensuring quality, safety, access to finance, all these sort of things. The same for the feeds, seeds, genetics, and health. We had a whole series of questions relating to market access, prices, resource access, the market size, competitors, the product producers, again, looking at their data needs, the processors and marketers, and finally the research and extension groups. So we ended up with a shopping list, if you like, of data needs by stakeholder group, developed and documented. This, of course, needs considerable further refinement. These were developed and are in some detail, but they obviously need further refinement. Distinct differences in the needs by different stakeholder groups, obviously, as to whether you are a producer looking at what data you need, or a policy person, but also these common needs of the dairy sector performance. There are some general across-the-board needs to understand where is the dairy sector going. Much focus was on the appropriateness of different institutions that were engaged as accessible data repositories, and options were proposed with both functionality and sustainability perspective. So, for example, from a functionality point of view, the genetics program that is supported by Bill and Melinda Gates in there is collecting data, and clearly is a place where data accessibility repository could be, but the downside of that is that they're not interested in health data and feeds data and other things, and so it's whereas the CSA, the major body on data, is potential applicant or person that could be a group that could be involved, but there is a great question about the type of data that they collect at the moment and the lack of connection between the livestock data and the economics and development side. So draft recommendations were presented on both the process and the data enhancement. A few lessons learned. I mean, there is a strong political process in support of making better use of Ethiopia's livestock resources in processes of development, and we have the master plan to follow that through. Predominantly focused on export of meat and live animals. That's what the bottom line is for Ethiopia. The dairy sector, though, presents this substantial opportunity, as I've tried to illustrate with the various donor groups that have come in to take a detailed look at it, of growing and increasingly urbanized population, but struggling in terms of the demand for milk, and also, most importantly, is this sector leadership and organization. And I'll say, and on the specific projects, available and accessible dairy data, extremely limited, so the modelers will need to be even braver or more patient. The process has been documented, and because I was asked to say, well, document a process, and how appropriate would it be to go into another country or another system? It has been done. It's not rocket science. It's basically identifying who the stakeholders are, talking to them, bringing them together, easily replicable in other countries, other things. Important to engage national scientists for ownership and buy-in. I emphasize that. I mean, I'm terribly sorry that Andrew and Jonathan weren't available, but to be honest, it made my life a lot easier to go in there, because there were all the connections and the facilitation. And I'm afraid Ethiopia is very sensitive, as many countries are, to the people coming in from outside and with agendas that may not be aligned with theirs. The process of identifying data needs identified broader institutional issues constraining the development of the dairy sector. We had this division this morning, do these take priority over the data? Well, they are certainly important up there. The workshop derived a proposal to present these for consideration at ministerial level at the end, and this was not supported, I think is the right word, by SEBI and Gates. So it has not taken place. I haven't presented it to government. That's why I put the diversifying expectations. The expectations of those who'd been involved in the workshop were for promoting the dairy sector. The expectations possibly of others was more on the data or those organizations. So my last note is the important development roles of pilot studies which add value to the data focus and the chance this gave, I believe, of providing impact to the organization of the dairy sector in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Hannah, are you going to speak or? Yep. Okay, any questions for Brian? John, yep.
Thanks, Brian. It's the figure you quoted, 40% of agricultural GDP from the dairy sector. Do you think that sort of figure is accurate? Do you feel comfortable with that?
I rather doubt it. But it was someone raised the point today that a lot of the opportunity is to pick up for data on things that have been published. It's a figure that flies around. Yeah, I doubt it. Steve,
yep.
You know, the butter sector in Ethiopia is very important traditionally. I think it comes mostly from the local cattle and so on. I'm just wondering, did you look at that? Did you see any kind of interaction between kind of the dairy sector with improved animals and this very large kind of butter industry, and what are there any implications there in terms of data?
Well, we looked at it in terms of the fact that yes, it exists. It's mostly in the pastoral, in the drier rural areas. But yes, I totally agree. It is important. I mean, the other thing that we looked at is in this issue of weekly and seasonal demand from this of what are the other products such as cheese, such as well, ghee and UHT milk, and there is almost no organization doing that. So there are a couple of these processors getting involved in cheeses, but I'm afraid it's not. It's the economics. I think a lot comes down to the incentives and the markets and the. But you're absolutely correct that is there. I didn't have enough time to go through that, but we have documented it.
Okay, we have a session to talk about the demand study in more detail, and we can pick up on some of these issues. But I'm going to just take one more question before we pass on to Hannah. Sorry, Mario.
Thank you. Brian, as a follow-up from Steve's question, the butter system in that country is mistaking the majority of the share compared to the fluid milk. For example, if you go back and see the consumption of milk, it accounts only the fluid milk. But the butter system takes more fluid milk compared to the fluid milk consumed.
Yes.
And it's not in the pastoral area at all. It is in the highland. In the pastoral area, it's more ghee type of.
I meant ghee when I'm.
Yeah, ghee. But butter is the highland thing.
Yes.
Everybody who owns like 5, 6, or 2 or 3 animals in the household produces butter, and the fluid milk is not coming to the market, so it's not accounted in the consumption. So we need to find a way of capturing that amount.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dadella. We can get into the detail in the discussion after coffee. But Hannah, do you want to just respond?
Brian. All right. I'm just going to take 5 minutes to provide a quick update on an exciting new project, which in Navasha I provided a bit of context around. Now the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Resources, really around a broader vision around how to improve data and information systems and analytic systems for the livestock sector. And this really started back in May of 2017, where our Deputy Director for Livestock received a request from the ministry to help transform these data systems to really inform better policy, programming, and planning decisions. So it fit very well. This request fit very nicely with the work that LD4D is doing and the dairy demand study. So just backing up a little bit, we did some scoping work in late 2017. The precise study that Brian mentioned, that was this landscape analysis in the original scoping. So there was a bit of sequencing. The landscape analysis and scoping that was conducted by Precise then led to a process over the last about 6 months of actually developing a grant to design an information system working with the ministry. So the timing worked out quite well that Brian was able to go to Ethiopia and work on the dairy demand study in the interim while we were developing this new investment. And many of the recommendations that came out of the report, and hopefully that'll be circulated for this group to look through, are going to provide really valuable inputs into this next phase of this project, which is really going to be the designing of what this information system, the capacities that are required within the ministries and how data are shared and whatnot will really go into this design phase. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of this new investment. So it's a new grant, actually is just launching. There will be a soft launch next week in Ethiopia. The suspense. Okay, thanks, Alan. There we go. So we have a new grant that's launching, as I said, next week. It's the soft launch in Ethiopia. It's called the Alive Project. It's designing a livestock information vision for Ethiopia. This first phase is going to be a 2-year project. And really, this is a partnership with the ministry. So it is being demanded and led by the ministry and supported by the foundation with our new grantee, which is Livestock Improvement Corporation, LIC, from New Zealand. This partnership is really to design a fit-for-purpose livestock information system. So this is totally going to be driven by the demands and needs and use cases within Ethiopia for how to better use what data are required, how the data will be used, who's making the decisions. It will include the development of guidelines around data integrity, standards for interoperability, so looking at what are those existing data systems, where are the data gaps, who are the other data producers, and we'll also define means to fill any data gaps. So this project itself is not going to be filling those gaps, but will help to identify what those gaps will be. And I think, again, Brian's project, which was a deep dive on dairy, has started to identify what some of those data gaps may be. It'll be really important, as he said, to really articulate and define what is the frequency of those data that are required, what's the granularity, who are the key users, how does that integrate with other data sources, what are the analytics, and all of that will be part of this design phase. This grant has these 4 objectives that you see here. The primary output is going to be a technical roadmap for this information system, and it will include in-depth capacity assessment and institutional capacity building, so looking at the who are the organizations that are responsible for managing the data, collecting the data, data sharing policies, data standards. It will be focused on refining the use cases that have been defined so far and really taking a top-down and bottom-up approach to defining what those data needs are. The second component is, in parallel, is going to actually be piloting the feasibility of using a satellite-based tool to monitor dry matter availability in plant health. This is using a tool that LIC has developed for New Zealand. It's called SPACE. So this will generate area level estimates of dry matter availability on a monthly basis, and also estimates of plant health. And hopefully, you know, those will be, not hopefully, but if the pilots go well, those data will also be made available, of course, for others to use. It's just a quick overview of the data, kind of the vision for the data flow diagram. Again, this is purely, it's owned by the government, and we're working in partnership to support their vision. Starting with the minister, and as probably many of you know, there's been some leadership changes within Ethiopia. So there's, with the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Livestock coming back together, there's been there's a new minister in place, and there's also been a reduction in the number of state ministries. So we've been working with the new State Minister for Livestock Resources, and this will be very much aligned with his vision. Just a quick overview of LIC. One of the reasons why they're a New Zealand-based team. It's actually a commercially focused farmer-owned cooperative, and one of the reasons we're really excited about working with them is that they've been partnering with the government for over 100 years, actually, and using developing information systems and looking at how to use data to actually improve livestock sector performance. And so we're hoping to leverage their technical expertise in terms of which information are required, because as you know, if you go and talk to stakeholders, you'll get that grocery list of data needs. Everybody has something that they're really interested in monitoring or measuring or collecting, but there has to be some level of prioritization to see what is really important to driving actually the productivity improvements. So really excited to be partnering with them, and hopefully we can maybe invite them to a future LD4D meeting. More to come. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Any quick questions for Hannah while Jonathan sets up? Mark, yeah.
You did not mention the word data quality, some sort of minimum standards there, which especially in such a setup will be very important.
Data integrity, data quality,
absolutely. Yeah, okay. Brian?
I'm interested in the name of your new project. It's the first time I've seen it, called Alive. Are you aware that there was a World Bank project on African livestock that did not do particularly well, and so it's interesting that you choose that name.
Okay, that's useful information.